Okay, so this is big, but if you're not a data analyst, it's probably going to be hard to understand. So again, I decided to use ChatGPT to sort of help you understand what I'm seeing. So here's a basic explanation. I took this key cycle data and I overlaid it on top of Trooper Paul's alleged incident data, where the 24.2 miles per hour vehicle speed is recorded. And guess what? Those plotted points intersect with one another. And from those intersections, we can determine that the majority of the available telemetry data is not intersecting with key cycle 1162. And that most of the braking, ABS and acceleration events are from key cycle 1164 through to 1167. So I asked ChatGPT to give me an easier way to explain this to you. ChatGPT replied, if key cycle 1162 contained an actual pedestrian impact, we would expect to see substantial telemetry data recorded, but is either missing or not included in the dataset. The telemetry data available is overwhelmingly from the other key cycles, meaning that any ABS activations or sudden braking events were more likely due to testing rather than an impact. If investigators did not distinguish between key cycles properly, then they may have mistakenly used testing data to support an alleged pedestrian impact claim. Another data point that intersected between all the data was the time elapsed in the key cycle data, meaning how much time elapsed while the key was turned on or the engine was running, versus the vehicle control history times, which are also the amount of time that has elapsed while the engine was running during that key cycle. Since these are essentially the same things, I asked ChatGPT to analyze those two columns. ChatGPT makes some key observations. The majority of elapsed time differences are negative, meaning that the telemetry recorded time is consistently earlier than the key cycle's recorded elapsed time. Most data aligns with key cycles other than 1162, reinforcing previous findings that the majority of available telemetry belongs to the testing phase rather than the alleged impact. Its analysis of key cycle 1162 found no significant telemetry data appears aligned with that key cycle. The dataset does not contain a meaningful amount of VCH time or elapsed time data for key cycle 1162, further confirming that the impact-related telemetry is missing, obviously because it doesn't exist. ChatGPT further explains, telemetry timestamps do not align with key cycle 1162 in a way that supports an impact event. The overwhelming amount of timestamp data is associated with key cycle 1165 onwards, affirming that the testing data is dominant in the dataset. The dataset appears to be missing impact-related time records, or the third party, i.e. Trooper Paul, mistakenly linked testing data to the alleged impact. I don't think it was a mistake. ChatGPT says the final verdict is the elapsed time versus VCH time analysis further supports the conclusion that key cycles associated with testing contain the majority of data, while key cycle 1162 is largely missing or unrecorded. I then asked ChatGPT, can you demonstrate how the alleged impact event at 1137.55 seconds to 1147.55 seconds compares to the key cycle dataset? To which ChatGPT replied with pretty much what I've already said. The two sets of data intersect at key points. It may not be clear from this diagram because the orange X's, which is the impact event data, are currently underneath the purple X's for the key cycle assignments. That's how closely those data matches up. In its analysis, ChatGPT says the alleged impact event overlap with multiple key cycle assignments, not just key cycle 1162. The majority of data points in this range are mapped to key cycle 1165 and the testing phase, rather than key cycle 1162. This means that much of the data analysed for acceleration, braking and ABS events may belong to testing rather than the impact event. It goes on with key findings. The dataset does not cleanly separate the alleged impact from the later testing cycles, 1164 to 1167. The third party may have unknowingly or intentionally mixed testing data into the impact event analysis. If investigators used all data without distinguishing key cycles, they may have mistakenly attributed testing-related ABS and braking events to the alleged pedestrian impact. But then it asks me, would you like to proceed with isolating key cycle 1162 and analysing its speed, braking and acceleration trends? And so I said yes, let's do that. Its analysis of vehicle speed and braking trends for key cycle 1162 came out with vehicle speed. The speed trend is gradual with no sudden drops, meaning there is no evidence of a high speed impact followed by an immediate stop. And if the vehicle had hit a pedestrian with significant force, we would expect to see a sharp deceleration in the speed data, but it is absent. And then it talks about the brake and oil pressure. No sudden extreme braking pressure at the alleged moment of impact. If an impact had occurred, we would expect a sudden spike in brake pressure, but the changes appear smooth. The braking pattern does not suggest an emergency stop or a reaction to a collision. In its key findings, ChatGPT says there is no clear evidence of a pedestrian impact in key cycle 1162. The vehicle speed trends do not show abrupt deceleration, which would be expected if a crash occurred. Braking data does not indicate an emergency stop or reaction to a sudden obstacle. This strongly suggests that the alleged impact either did not occur or was misinterpreted based on other events. Okay, so just for good measure, I plugged in Paul's VCH distance chart, which we know is just a representation of the same data in his alleged impact chart, just to see if ChatGPT actually picks that up and if it detects any anomalies in the data. It starts by reviewing the columns in the data and then listing the 4 questions it's going to analyse the data for. 1. Does this data set match the existing data for key cycle 1162? 2. Are there differences in speed, braking and distance calculations compared to the first data set? 3. Is there any sign that this data was collected from testing rather than the actual impact? 4. Are the VCH timestamps aligned with the previous data set, or do they indicate inconsistencies? Obviously, these lines of questioning come from the AI learning what we just did and applying it to this new data set. So now it's going to 1. Compare the VCH time values from this data set to the previous one to check if the time sequences align. 2. Compare the speed and braking patterns to detect inconsistencies between the data sets. 3. Analyse the distance covered values to see if they match the earlier analysis. In doing so, it creates a new table to match the time elapsed columns. And then it finds VCH time matches, but data is assigned to key cycle 1165, not 1162. The VCH time values in the new dataset align with those in the previous dataset. However, in the previous dataset, these timestamps were assigned to key cycle 1165, not 1162. This means the majority of the data collected for this time frame was already flagged as being from the testing phase, not the alleged impact event. What this means, even though the new dataset claims to represent the impact, its timestamps align with data that was already categorized under key cycle 1165. If the alleged impact happened in key cycle 1162, we would expect the data to be categorized as such, but it is not. This strongly suggests that the new dataset is not independent, but is actually a reprocessed version of data already shown to be from testing. So in my previous questions to ChatGPT, we'd established that the speed and distance values that Trooper Paul mentioned didn't actually match this data either. So that was my next question, to cross-check the speed and distance values between the new dataset and the existing dataset. And it found speed and distance discrepancies between the two datasets. For speed differences, it noted, the new dataset reports lower speeds at several timestamps compared to the existing dataset. Example, at 1143.05 seconds, the existing dataset records 8.3 miles per hour, while the new dataset reports 1.9 miles per hour. Another example, at 114.05 seconds, the existing dataset records 16 miles per hour, while the new dataset still records 9.9 miles per hour. For the distance values, it notes, the distance values from the new dataset closely align with the existing dataset. This suggests that the distance calculations were derived from the same data source. So what this means is, the two datasets appear to be derived from the same vehicle telemetry, but the speed values in the new dataset do not match the existing data. The distance values are consistent, meaning both datasets agree on the amount of movement during the event. The speed discrepancies suggest that either the new dataset has been modified, averaged, or smoothed in a way that reduces peak speeds. One of the datasets contains calculation errors or data extraction mistakes, or a third-party processing may have introduced inconsistencies, accidentally or purposely. Next, I ask it to analyze the acceleration differences. Key findings: acceleration discrepancies between the two datasets. Dun dun dun! Of course there are. Acceleration differences. The new dataset reports higher acceleration values in some cases and negative values in others, which do not align with the existing telemetry. Example, at 1143.55 seconds, the new dataset reports 7.29, but the existing data records show negative 0.94 blah 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 meters per second squared. Because it's negative, it's deceleration. Example, at 1144.05 seconds, the new dataset reports negative 0.11, which is deceleration, while existing dataset shows negative 2.2 meters per second. Acceleration sign differences. Some values are positive in one dataset and negative in the other, which suggests a difference in calculation methodology. Well, one is F and the other one is meters per second squared, so obviously there is a difference. If acceleration is calculated inconsistently between datasets, it could lead to misleading conclusions about braking and impact events. What this means: the new dataset's acceleration data does not align with the existing text stream dataset, suggesting it may have been processed differently. The new dataset may have applied smoothing, rounding, or alternative formulas for acceleration calculations. If investigators relied on this new dataset without cross-referencing the text stream data, they may have misinterpreted acceleration changes as impact-related forces. So there you have it. The AI can clearly see, as I can, that these data are not from key cycle 1162. By plotting the data from the key cycle events over the top of the data from the incident events, it was clearly able to see, as was I, that the key cycle duration, being the only common data between all the data sets, clearly shows us that Trooper Paul is trying to pass off his testing data as some kind of alleged impact incident. And this is how you prove it. You show the jury Trooper Paul's impact incident data, and then right there in front of their eyes, you lay over the top of that the key cycle data, so they can clearly see the data is not from key cycle 1162. This may well be an obsolete argument. It depends how you want to go about things. Because as we know, Key Cycle 1162 was actually Michael Proctor. And now that this whole other new Sally Port footage turns up of her car being reversed at some stage, that pushes the key cycle back to around 1155, when it was actually outside of 34 Fairview Road the night of the incident. That strategy didn't quite have the impact we thought it might at first trial, so I would hope that they would do something a little more constructive during closing in Trial 2.0 to help the jury visualise exactly what they're trying to say. I have a whole other analysis on Trooper Paul's data, which again involves asking ChatGPT to verify the things that I'm noticing in the data, and whether or not things Trooper Paul claimed about the data can actually be seen in the data. And, well, let's just say he cherry-picked his own testing data, which actually doesn't show any impact. Anyway, that's a spoiler. That's the next upload. Cheerio for now.